I write a newsletter once a month, and I usually like to take at least one of my talks from that topic. So I get some of the best questions ever from the kids class. The kids are very inquisitive, and some of them don't know like that their questions are ridiculous. And sometimes they're like really like deep and poignant. And this one was just a very simple thing. But it's a simple question with what could be a very simple answer. And sometimes I give the very simple answer, and usually I give a very complex answer. So his question is, what does martial arts mean? And this kid has been coming for like 2 weeks. He doesn't know. He keeps hearing me say martial arts. He might not even know that I'm talking about the class that he's in, but he's like, what does martial arts mean? And there's, of course, the literal words martial arts, and so I'll talk about that. But then there's all the rest of the answer. I would never just say, even to a kid, like martial arts is like martial means fighting and art means art. That's it. So I went off on like a 5-minute talk, and you guys will get the 15-minute version of this or the 20-minute version. So martial arts is just a very big umbrella term, and it could refer to things that are really not philosophically rooted in the same kind of philosophy that we use, or any philosophy at all. So some people for sure do boxing or do Greco-Roman wrestling with some kind of a philosophy to it, but usually it's like just purely, this is the fighting movement. This is the philosophy of the physicality of what we're doing. It doesn't really have to do with moving meditation or mindfulness or anything like that. But generally, when I'm talking about martial arts, I'm referring to something that has a bit of a philosophy to it. So you could say that boxing is a martial art. I would say it's like a fighting style. The same thing about like Krav Maga. Krav Maga, a very effective fighting style, but usually not taught with a philosophy. It's designed for military use. It's not designed for civilian use and self-improvement. It's just like, this is how I kill somebody the fastest and not let them kill me. So when we talk about it, we're usually referring to things that have some kind of a link back to Kung Fu, the original martial art. And some people say that there are other fighting styles that happened far, far before Kung Fu, but Kung Fu was like the first one that really put it together in this package with meditation, mindfulness, and the physical self-defense part of it. And martial means fighting or warlike, and then art is just something deeper. So you get the idea of art, but when we talk about it in our terms, it's like it's like we are the art. So you think of painting, and most people think of the art as being the painting that is produced. And of course, it's hard to argue with that. But I would say even with painting, the artist is transformed much more than the canvas is, at least over time. You make one painting, sure, but you you take it on as like a way of life, and you're constantly kind of in it, then you are transformed. And it's the same thing with us. We are transformed, and the physical art that we're performing, of course, we're getting physically better at it, and it can look really nice depending on who's doing it. It might look really beautiful, but that's not really the art. The art is what's going on inside of us. So we're really transformed in a lasting, meaningful way. If there is some kind of an internal focus, so it does not have to be sitting meditation like we talk about most often, but it usually is. When you did karate, they probably did some kind of meditation. Sometimes they'll do that in a very traditional school. And sometimes they don't. Sometimes it's just like we'll bow in and then we're practicing, but there is some sense of this being like a moving meditation. I'm very mindful, right? At least, of course, I'm mindful so that I don't get punched. But there's also the aspect of like, I'm setting myself up. I'm like framing my awareness and my consciousness in a very specific way where there's no distractions. There is no, I'm sparring and I'm thinking about what I'm going to eat for dinner, or, what I'm going to do when I get back home, whatever. So that single pointed focus is really a key part of it. So there's the external, the self-defense, the fighting, and then the internal. That's martial arts. You'll see one of the only bright colors that we have in the dojo is this orange fountain. And it's very specific because if you go to the Shaolin Temple, which is where my Sifu went and practiced, and the first place of all martial arts where Dhammo Bodhidharma taught, you'll notice that the monks wear some different colored robes, but they're most famously wearing orange robes. And this is not probably how they think of it, but it really ties in well with how we talk about it. If you think of red, the color red, as being like the fighting aspect of what we do, or of any martial arts, and that's easy enough to think of it because it's like blood. It's like that's the red is the martial, the fight. And then if you think of the internal parts of what we do, the meditation, the mindfulness, all of that as being yellow, martial arts is not, as a lot of people think, red next to yellow. It's not, oh, we meditate, and then we stop doing that, and we start fighting. No, the whole thing is like a blend. So it is orange. It's red and yellow together. And it really is supposed to be all of that all the time. So this is the kind of right way to think of the philosophy of martial arts. It's not purely internal. It's not purely external. It's a blend. So Kung Fu, I'll talk a little bit more about Kung Fu specifically. It's largely considered the original style of martial arts. So the Indian monk Bodhidharma traveled from India, which is where most Indian monks are from, to China. And there's a whole great story, many, many stories about the way that he traveled there. Some of the stories say that he floated on a cloud because he was supposed to be that enlightened. Another story says that he flowed down the Yellow River on a reed, like a piece of grass. He was just like surfing on a piece of grass to get there. He probably rode a horse or something. But one of the things that happened was he arrived and there was lots of like pomp and circumstance. They knew that he was coming, and a lot of people have been studying this Buddhist philosophy in China, and so this very high-ranking, very important monk was coming, and they're like, you got to go see, I don't know if it was the emperor, but it's somebody high up in charge. And he's, you know, the leader, the king, the emperor of some huge part of China. And so Bodhidharma comes to the palace, and the emperor will call him. He says, look at all these things that I've done. I've built this temple, and I've, you know, paid for all of these monks to do all of this, and and tell me that I'm going to heaven. And Bodhidharma is not that kind of character. He says, all of this is meaningless. Doesn't help you at all. And so the emperor doesn't like that. He kicks him out. He's like, get out of my sight. And so then Bodhidharma is wandering through the countryside in the woods, and he comes across the Shaolin Temple, the temple in the woods. And he sees that the monks practicing there are getting fat and lazy, and they're falling asleep during their meditation, which I'm sure none of you will ever do, not even you, Tanya. That's why you're drinking that tea before we meditate. But one of the stories is that he got there and he was trying to teach the monks, and they weren't receptive. They're like, we know what we're doing. We don't want your help. And so he went up and meditated in a cave. And you can still go to Shaolin Temple. I went and visited. I didn't get to practice there with the monks. I literally was there for one day. And I didn't even get to go to Bodhidharma's cave. But my Sifu got to go visit there, and lots of the stories involve him in his cave. But they say that he went there and he meditated for years. And finally, the monks begged him. They saw how, you know, enlightened he was. And they're like, come teach us. One of the stories say that Bodhidharma himself was also tired of falling asleep during meditation. So they say he cut off his eyelids so that he couldn't sleep. This is unlikely to be true, but lots of legend around Bodhidharma. They say where his eyelids hit the ground, the first tea trees sprouted. And so instead of cutting off your eyelids, you can just drink tea. Much, much better for all of us. But Bodhidharma taught the monks, and the philosophy was always from the very beginning about, you know, meditation and internal practice. This is what they were doing before there was ever a physicality. And the very first stuff was very simple. It was not all this fancy, you know, floating around and all the crazy stuff you see in movies. It was like this. Like, if you were lucky, they let you punch like this, right? A lot of just stances and, you know, basic stuff. And then over many, many years, because this happened around the year 500, so it's been 1,500 years, it evolves and eventually becomes, of course, all of the very impressive styles of Kung Fu, but then branched off into all of the other styles of martial arts. And so this was really something that Bodhidharma did. That's why we have a statue of him and nobody else. The Kung Fu styles, there are literally thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of styles of Kung Fu. And the style that we do is a little bit more rare, a little bit less common, the style Yuchia, but you've heard of different styles like the animal styles, or northern long fist, southern long fist, Choi La Foot, Jeet Kune Do. We have Bruce Lee's book in the lobby, and these are all different styles, kind of branching from the same basic first philosophy and idea. Now, the term Kung Fu. So Kung Fu does not mean. I asked the kids earlier today. I asked the older kids because they're supposed to know this stuff. I'm like, what does Kung Fu mean? And this is what happens. If you're in a class and you don't ask me questions, then I start asking people questions, because I'm trying to make sure that you're paying attention and maybe embarrass you a little bit to asking me questions. And so like 5 kids raised their hand. I called on all of them, and only the last kid actually knew the answer. So the first kid was like, self-defense. I'm like, no. And then the next kid's like, mindfulness. I'm like, much closer. And then one of the kids said, achievement through effort. So this is one of the ways that you can translate Kung Fu. Achievement through effort, or wisdom through skill. And this has nothing to do with punching and kicking, obviously. It could, but it could also have anything to do with anything that you're doing. So if you ever watch, one of my favorite martial arts movies is Shaolin Soccer. It's a very funny, great movie, and it kind of, the whole movie is about this, because they're using martial arts skills, but also like the mindfulness and like the, never say die kind of attitude of a martial artist, and they're using it to play soccer, which is also very silly and ridiculous. But at the end of the movie, the main character, who's played by the director and the writer, I think, and I forget, is it Stephen Chow? He's awesome, hilarious, and a really great martial artist. And he is saying, like, this is Kung Fu. You can have a Kung Fu in anything. Of course, you can have a Kung Fu in martial arts. You can have a Kung Fu in playing soccer, or he uses like trimming the hedges, or whatever you're doing. So this is really our core philosophy, is we want to take whatever we're learning in class, of course, like the physicality of it, like how do I have better balance, and how do I move, and how do I stay relaxed, but the internal parts of it, how can I be focused and present, and then use that for anything that we do. So, of course, if somebody tries to attack you out there in the real world, you want to be present for that. But what if somebody's just trying to argue with you? You want to be able to keep yourself calm and kind of flow with it. So all of that is really the lesson that we're after. You might practice martial arts for many, many years and never get into a fight. And what a waste that would be, unless you're really getting something more out of it. So that's Kung Fu. Achievement through effort, wisdom through skill. Tai Chi is another one of our styles. This kind of branches off many hundreds of years after Bodhidharma. And so they largely attribute Tai Chi to the 12th century legendary Taoist figure, I'm going to butcher it, Zhang Sing Feng, or I've heard Chen Sing Feng, but they say that he was watching a crane fight a snake. And he was watching kind of both animals and see how they like move in different ways. And of course, this links back to like the animal styles of Kung Fu. But he's like, I want to make a style that kind of imbues this natural grace. And like the snake doesn't try to fight like a bird. Like it knows its nature and it knows how to do it. Yet in Tai Chi and in some styles of Kung Fu, we're doing things that it's like a lot of the names are like stroke the bird's tail, or snake creeps down, or white stork cools wings. So you're kind of moving like animals. And this is very much in the Taoist philosophy of being super connected to nature. And if you haven't read the Tao Te Ching, I highly recommend. This is a very esoteric, kind of difficult to grasp book. And part of that is by design, because as Lao Tzu says, the Tao that can be named is not the eternal. So like, if you can put it into words, it's not really it. You can't really grasp it. Like the words can only point us in the direction. And that's never truer than like a martial arts class, where I'm talking, and then we're going to sit and breathe, because you can't really get anything from the words. But this was one of the much more kind of Taoist-based arts rather than just more like Buddhist. But the fighting form, you would refer to it as Tai Chi Chuan. And if you just say Tai Chi, some people are talking about the self-defense aspects of it, but usually it's more like the internal part. So this is really our focus. We have the Kung Fu class. The Tai Chi is much more about the inside. So the word Chi by itself is usually in reference to like an internal energy. And so a lot of Tai Chi and Qigong and different energy kind of practices are about like, harnessing the chi in your body, or being able to kind of pull in energy from your surroundings and nature. And it can have to do with what you're eating. It can be like you want to eat things within balance. You're not eating like only meat. You're not eating only, cold foods. There's a whole philosophy behind that as well, which I'm not an expert in, so I won't even try. But that's kind of chi. It's like the energy work, the flow of energy in your body. But when you say Tai Chi, it has kind of a different meaning. And kind of like Kung Fu, this is a very esoteric translation or meaning. It just means the supreme ultimate, or the grand ultimate. Like, what does that mean? It doesn't mean punching and kicking. It doesn't even mean like, gentle movement and moving meditation. It's literally like the alpha and the omega. It's like all of it, the grand, the supreme. And you can also think of this in terms of like the yin and yang, right? Opposites that are seemingly kind of opposed to each other, like light and shadow, but they can only exist with each other. There is no light without shadow, or shadow without light, right? You kind of have to have both. And I heard somebody say, this is a beautiful quote about this idea, where people are always thinking like I want to be the light, or be in the light. And it's like, whether you're thinking of it as being morally good or whatever, that's not only is it not super realistic, but it is also not really what you want, because there has to be an interplay, right? Imagine if you could actually get rid of all of the things that we think of as being like bad or evil or whatever. It would be a very weird world. It would be hard. You couldn't like move around probably. So it's this recognition of forces that are kind of opposite are also interconnected, and we have to kind of see them in that way and use them in that way. So that's Tai Chi. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, the other style that we do. This is very, very different. So a lot of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, the majority of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, has little to no philosophy to it at all. It is a newer style, and part of that, or part of the reason that you would say it's usually done more of like a sport, is because it's a newer style. It hasn't had as much time to kind of get a philosophy behind it. A lot of the like more old school jiu-jitsu teachers who've been doing it for a very long time, like my teacher, Hector Machado, has been practicing for decades, and he got so far past black belt that he's got a coral belt that has red and black in it, and he's like one belt away from literally the highest belt that you can get in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And he teaches some meditation and some mindfulness, and that's always been a part of what he does, but that's more rare. Jiu-Jitsu, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, comes from Judo, which also comes from Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, and so they kind of just call it Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And a lot of that, of course, had more traditionally a philosophy to it, a meditation and mindfulness, but was kind of turned more into a sport. So like you watch judo in the Olympics, which I could talk about this for an entire half an hour, how much it was awful to watch. Now, I'm not a judo expert. I've done it a bit, and it's part of our jiu-jitsu and part of our kung fu class, but they'll do like a bow, and then that's it. The rest of it is like, there's very little that I love about watching judo in the Olympics. My biggest gripe is they teach it to the rules of the sport. And the rules of the sport are very different from what would work, in some ways at least, very different from what would work in self-defense, right? So you score a point by throwing somebody on their back, or you get some points for if like they land on their side, right? So what people do oftentimes is they can feel like maybe they're going to throw me, so they literally flop on their stomach. And judo is a beautiful art and can be absolutely incredibly powerful, especially as a part of a broader array of martial arts, but the specific kind of Olympic judo rules kind of lead to some silliness. And that is a huge digression, has very little to do with what I'm talking about. But you get how like making it a sport, treating it as a sport changes it very much. But the essence of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is like the essence of judo before sport, or judo or Jiu-Jitsu. There is absolutely a deeper meaning to it. So Jiu-Jitsu just means the gentle art. It doesn't mean choke them, break their arm. It means gentle art. That's it. Now that again could be anything. You get the gentle art. What am I painting? Or whatever. But there is this idea in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu where you are very much trying to kind of flow with the attacker's energy in the same way that we do in Tai Chi. In class earlier today, we were doing push hands in Tai Chi. In push hands, we don't usually just try to stop the energy, right? We flow with it. We push and we kind of pull, and there's this kind of playing with your partner's energy. It's the same thing in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu because you are calm and relaxed. You can feel it. And this is the number one thing that I'm always telling the newer Jiu-Jitsu students is like you get into this position where it's very, it is a very common, very kind of tempting thing to just tense up. You feel like, oh, I'm kind of in danger, and so your whole body tenses. But when you tense, you cannot feel your partner's energy. You can't go with it. There's no gentle art to that. I just turn myself into a rock and I'm just stuck. So this is absolutely one of the, it's a great way to point to, again, the quintessential philosophy where if we can learn to flow in a physical situation like that, we can learn to be relaxed and feel what our partner is giving us, then that should be able to translate into everyday life. And you could think of it in terms of, well, this person is trying to start an argument with me, so instead of just arguing back and butting heads, I kind of just, invite myself or invite them in, and I'm like, well, tell me, why do you feel that way? Or like, how can I help you? That will usually stop an argument and turn it into something more profound or at least useful. But it could be anything. So we like to think of ourselves as being like a river, and this is the same thing in our meditation practice. Our mind flows, it's like a river. It's not meant to be stopped. If you are a river and you come up to a boulder, you flow around it. You don't try to move the boulder. Right now, of course, the river over decades and centuries will eventually wear down that rock, that boulder becomes a stone, and then it eventually disappears, or the river will like put a hole in it, right? But the essential nature of the river is flow. You come to an impediment and you don't allow yourself to be stopped. You will flow around it. So this is why Bruce Lee always says, be like water. So we're meant to be that way physically and mentally. So when we encounter a problem, I love saying this all the time, is one of the most important lessons we can get, is we don't treat a problem like a problem. We don't treat it like something to be, to fight against or something to wrestle with. We treat it like an opportunity. And when we see that rock as an opportunity, the opportunity is not to fight against it. The opportunity is, oh, I was going this way, now I have an opportunity to explore something else, right? So when we encounter a challenge, we see that as an opportunity to explore different avenues, right? Somebody grabs my arm, I don't think that's a problem. I think, oh, this is an opportunity. How can I flow with that? You're driving down the street. You come upon, one lane is stopped. You're not like, well, I'm just going to lay on my horn, which is what most people in LA do. You kind of zip around it. You're like, all right, I'm going to explore a different lane. Or this whole 405 is shut down. I'm going to go take a different street from what I normally do. I was talking about this morning. If you are really trying to find a way to imbue this philosophy of having a beginner's mind, this is really what it's all about, is like being creative and finding new ways of doing things. Beginner's mind, a really simple way to practice this is, instead of driving the same way, home every single day, I just take a different direction. I go on a different street. I notice things that I've never noticed before. I see houses. Sometimes I like to do this, and I'll look at the house, and I'm like, there's a stroller in front of this house. There's a car that's all like beat up, and I'm thinking about like this whole life, like all of the texture that's that's living in this house. There are people that have an entire universe of themselves, and that's something that we hardly ever consider. And so this is kind of what's available to us when we stop seeing things as problems. We see the challenge as an opportunity. We flow, and we find a different way around it. So when we meditate, which I'll finally stop talking and we'll get to meditate for a few minutes here, try to have that same kind of, philosophy, but just like a general feel to your meditation. It shouldn't feel like I'm stuck. A lot of times what happens is we understand, what I'm trying to do is have a clear mind. So I'll sit and then I'll start to think and then I'll fight against the thoughts. I'll be like, stop thinking. I'm not supposed to be thinking right now. And that just adds resistance and gets you stuck, right? Now, a thought is, of course, in meditation, kind of a challenge. If you have a persistent thought, it can feel like a boulder that's right there in your way. And so you can flow around it. You could just invite the boulder in. Another way to think of it is like you're trying to meditate and you're here in your house and it's nice and quiet. It's totally peaceful. There's nothing going on. And then you hear this knock at the door and it's like really loud and it's persistent. And you can try to ignore it. Or you can try to, put your fingers in your ears and go, la, 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 I don't hear it. Or you can just go open the door and invite that person in and then just take them right to your back door and then let them out the back door. And that was it. They were so insistent on coming in. And this thought sometimes is very insistent. And so what we can do is accept it. And in meditation, we just label it as thought. That's it. I'm not fighting it. I'm just recognizing it. I'm accepting it. That's a thought that I had. And then I can let it go. Because resistance allows it to persist. But if we just invite it in and then take it out the back door, much easier. So when we sit, we want to try to sit as still as possible. And this will allow our minds to become calm and yet still be relaxed. If you're rigid and tense, that's going to cause tension in the mind too. And then when the thought comes, try to flow with it. And maybe you'll recognize this is a thought that I just have to have right now. It's a thought that keeps coming up. It's something that I know if I don't deal with it, then I'm just going to be sitting here and thinking about it the whole time. That might happen. We want to try to avoid that, but if it happens, it happens. So then you think about it. You think like, okay, what am I going to do about this thing, this persistent thought I have? I didn't eat anything. It's been a long time. I keep thinking about what I'm going to eat for dinner. I'm thinking the same thing right now, I promise you. So, am I going to get it? You won't get a ticket at this time. But you've got a thought. It's there, right? And so you can think, what am I going to do? I decide this is what I'm going to do. As soon as I'm done, I'm going to go move my car so I don't get a ticket, and I'm going to go drive someplace to eat. And I make the plan, and then I say, okay, that's done. I've decided what I'm going to do, and then I can set that aside. Usually it doesn't have to be such an involved thing. It can literally be, what am I going to do? I'm going to think about this after I'm done with meditation. That's my plan. You might need to write it down. If you have a thought that is really stuck in your brain, you literally just write it down and then let it go. I don't let you guys write on the mats in here, but that's another idea. And you'll probably notice that whatever the really important problems are that we have, you will almost certainly be better off dealing with them after you've meditated. Not better off dealing with it sitting here and stewing about it and stressing about it. So try to get to that clear space, and then whatever your issues are, ticket, hunger, whatever, it will be there ready for you when your meditation is done, and then you'll be able to deal with it the best possible way. Sit comfortably. So I'll go over some ideas. Sitting cross-legged is great. If you can't sit cross-legged very comfortably, like me, then Seiza is also wonderful, but just make sure that your knees are even with or below your hips. If your knees are sticking way up, your legs are going to get, they're going to fall asleep. You know how to turn off the lights, right, Corey?
I do not, I can figure it out.
They're right over there. Just literally turn off all the lights. Thank you, sir. So your hands upturned, they can be together, separate. You just don't want them sliding down so that you're slouching, shoulders rolled back, chin parallel to the ground. Corey, yeah, you got it. All of those lights. Go ahead. Oh, you did not find it. It's right here. Reach around that thing. There's the lights. Turn them all off. Brilliant. Thank you, sir. Nope. There you go. Okay. And then the position of the eyes, usually a slightly raised gaze is going to give us the best chance at staying awake and staying focused and present. This is associated with a raised consciousness. So, pull, close eyes, spine is straight, eyes are upturned. Relax and watch the breath. When your mind wanders, as it will, then just use that as an opportunity to refocus. Remember, that's part of the point of meditation, is practicing focusing your mind. And when we refocus, that is strengthening our mental discipline. You have a persistent thought, you can label it as thought, make a plan to deal with it, and then let it go. And the way that we focus on the breath can mean lots of different things, but generally what we're doing is just focusing on the physical sensation of the breath. You can feel the breath filling up your belly as you breathe from the diaphragm. You can feel the breath passing through your throat, or you can just feel the inhale with the nose. And just keep returning back to that physical sensation. That is our anchor to the present moment. This breath is never going to happen again. It is the most perfect representation of this present moment. Nothing else really needs our attention right now.